everyone. I'm Rishika. I'm the intern for Aks. I've recently come into this role just early on in this month, and it's been quite a quick transition because towards the end of last month, I knew that I wanted to volunteer some of my time at an NGO, and I was hearing about Aks from friends, and I was lucky enough to get in touch with Barkha and get the opportunity to become social media intern. And it's been great. I'm really enjoying myself. I'm hoping to immerse myself completely. And the topic of domestic violence and sexual assault is something that I want to know more about and learn more about. And yes, very enlightening so far. And now I'll introduce Barkha, who is the director of Aks, who she's worked with gender issues and trauma for 17 years. She's trained in the US and started the Aks Foundation in 2009. And then, sorry, I'll just repeat that if it was paused. She trained in the US and started Aks in 2009 and then launched her crisis line in 2013.
Thank you for the introduction.
No problem.
Rishika, I'm losing you intermittently.
Is it good now? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So today the topic that we're going to be discussing is mental health and domestic violence. So we'll cover some of the psychological and mental health impact of domestic violence. And today is, we decided to do it today because it is World Mental Health Day, the 10th of October. And is there anything that you want to say before we just dive in to the questions?
No, let's dive in.
Okay, great. So before we start talking about the mental health impacts and the psychological impacts, I thought we would sort of lay the foundation by talking about some of what some of the main causes are of domestic violence.
So there really is one main cause of domestic violence, and that's patriarchy. Patriarchy promotes domestic violence. It raises us to be, for men, it sometimes raises us to be violent, and for women, it raises us to be submissive, which really creates a power dynamic where men have more power, not only structurally and institutionally, but also in the family. So, for example, things like the man of the castle, who wears the pants in the house, or who's the main breadwinner, who should be the breadwinner. So gender stereotypes, gender, how we evolve in terms of who we are and how important gender is to that is really what causes domestic violence. All other things that you hear in terms of alcohol or like mentally unstable people use violence, that's actually just excuses, because I work with mental illness and I work in the field of mental health for so many years, and I don't know if everybody who has a mental health issue is violent. It's not true at all. So it's really people who are violent, of course depends on the kind of violence as well, but most domestic violence, it is not about mental health or addictions alone. It's really about the status of women in the society and how gender roles and gender socialization perpetuates and promotes violence.
Right. Okay. And so we all know that there is a link between domestic violence and mental health. But if you can talk about how domestic violence actually increases the risk of mental health conditions, of certain mental health conditions.
Absolutely. So when somebody is being through domestic violence or intimate partner violence or in an abusive relationship, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual, or verbal, or even financial, the issue with that is that it eventually becomes traumatic. So the reaction that you see is something that we call the trauma reaction. Now, the trauma reaction actually resides in your body. That means when we experience trauma, it's not something that only happens to our mind. It's something that resides in our body. And just to explain really quickly, the first thing is chronic stress. So anybody who lives in any situation that's abusive or dangerous all the time, their autonomic nervous system is working much more than it should, because it's always in fight, flight, or freeze mode in order to protect you. And just the fact that your autonomic nervous system is working extra will cause a whole range of physical and mental issues, right? Obviously. So it's a chronic stress reaction as well. When I say it resides in your body, I first want to cover like physical reactions to trauma. So when I first see survivors, one of the first things I notice is the fatigue that they experience. There's a lot of fatigue, like just this tiredness, not only this emotional tiredness, but this physical tiredness and this weakness that they feel. In India, very, very often we see a lot of somatic complaints like headaches, stomach problems, gastrointestinal problems, skin issues, which are related to stress. And when we see the stress, sometimes it's related to intimate partner violence. And again, stomach issues and skin issues, autoimmune disorders are caused by chronic stress, or chronic stress plays a huge role in them. But immediate reaction, acute trauma reactions, we can also see palpitations, excessive sweating, chest or head pains, dizziness, trouble breathing, and something known as the startle reaction. So what's the startle reaction? That means if you've lived with somebody who's violent, your autonomic nervous system is constantly telling you're in danger. So even loud noises or sudden movements can cause a startle reaction, which is a part of post-traumatic stress disorder. So you see a lot of post-traumatic stress. And like I said, this traumatic stress resides in your body. So no matter how much only cognitive work is done, it actually does not work. And a lot of the work that needs to be done with survivors of domestic violence, or any kind of violence for that matter, is very mind body. So it becomes very important for the client to recognize the mind body connection and the reaction that they're having. Of course, shock. Most women or most survivors who come to us can't believe that it's happening to them, or that they've been taking it for so long, or just this shock, like, I can't believe I ended up here. Because obviously a lot of times it's somebody you loved, you married, you wanted a life with, and you're shocked that that's the situation you ended up in. Heightened senses. So your sense of sight, sense of hearing actually gets heightened, again, because the autonomic nervous system is constantly warning you that you're in danger. And when the emotions become too much and very overwhelming, then you see numbness. So if for people who've gone through domestic violence for years and years, you will not see everything that I was talking about as obviously. So they're also going through chronic stress, but because of elevated cortisol levels for so long, that's a hormone that's released when we are stressed out, and overwhelming feelings, there is a shutdown. And that's called the freeze response, where the person goes into freeze because they've gone through this violence for too long, and the body can no longer cope with it, so it kind of goes numb and freezes. So that's what happens physically. Do you have any questions, or should I go into what happens in the mind, and as in cognitively and psychologically?
I think that was gonna be my next question as well. So this month we wanted to like educate people a lot about this whole idea as to why she just doesn't leave. And so in our upcoming posts, we'll be explaining a lot of the reasons and going through that in more detail. But in your experience, what are some of like recurring psychological issues that are faced, and how does that have relation to this idea of why doesn't she just leave?
So one is also these physical reactions, right? If I'm constantly tired, you really think that I'm in a position to fight a legal battle, fight somebody who has more power, probably more money. So that's one thing for sure. But psychologically, women go through helplessness, powerlessness, irritability, moodiness, which is why a lot of men will then try to put it back on the woman, saying that, see, she shouts, she screams because she shows irritability or a reaction to the behavior. You see a lot of grief. So the grief reaction is because trauma with it inherently brings loss. That means it brings a loss of safety, it brings a loss of choice, brings a loss of control, brings a loss of what you imagined your marriage to look like. So you very often as therapists, and many therapists miss this, the grief reaction is actually pretty normal, because people are like, if he hits you, you shouldn't miss him. But you also love this person. So, and you also have great memories with this person. So missing them, grieving the loss of the relationship, or grieving the loss of the fact that you imagined a family and now you might have to break the family, is super hard for women. You also see this sense of injustice, like nobody's looking out for me, even though the law is so strong, and we're going to talk about the law. uh, we know the law is not easy in terms of execution. So what they go through in terms of the legal system, just systemic barriers, make it impossible for women to leave. Where women have actually told me the known devil is better than the unknown. Like, I rather just put up with this violence, even though it's cyclical, it doesn't happen that much, or it's reducing, just so that I don't have to leave and start a new life where I don't know anything, or I don't have money, or the system won't support me. And that's awful. And that's why Aks exists, so that we can work with the client in terms of fighting these systemic barriers as well. Another thing is feeling overwhelmed, very vulnerable, feeling not yourself. So many women will say, this is not who I was. This is not who I was. So even the story that we're sharing right now is one of our clients who did leave her partner eventually after years and years of abuse. One of the biggest things she kept saying, Barkha, I'm just not myself. I don't know who I am anymore. Because she was just so spiritually, physically, emotionally broken. Because even God, right? Your faith in God gets shaken if you're a spiritual or religious person. Like, if I'm a good person, why is this happening to me? So also, if you've had childhood trauma, then sometimes you associate trauma with love, and that's called trauma bonding. But this new trauma might also remind you of all old traumas. So you might be having like complex PTSD, which is when traumatic experiences keep happening. So PTSD actually becomes more complex. So post-traumatic stress disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder are very common. Anger, sometimes feelings of revenge, dissociation, that means dissociating with your body, and having this feeling like when you're being hit, you're outside of your body. Long-term depression, night terrors, shame, embarrassment, all of these are part of the trauma reaction and what the woman's going through, or the guy is going through if there is domestic violence. So even hysteria, and again, women are then blamed for being hysterical after being in abusive relationships. Also, the worst is the loss of pride, dignity, your identity, which really obviously hurts anybody. No, none of us want to live in a world where we don't feel respected and don't have a sense of dignity, security. So a lot of that is the psychological response to trauma.